Okay. Hi, everyone. Nice to see lots of you tuning in from various corners of the world from chat. I'm Sam, and given that everyone else is saying hello from where they're from, I am currently in London, where it is getting dark, and I don't think it's raining outside. Yeah, so I will introduce myself. I'm Sam. I'm a product engineer here at Incident.io, and I'm the tech lead of the response team here. The response team look after quite a lot of different parts of our platform, including our post-mortems product. And that's something that we've been doing a lot of work on recently. And so I've spent a lot of time thinking about post-mortems over the past few months. I've worked at Instant.io for 3.5 years. And before that, I worked at Monzo, who are a fintech here in the UK. Before that, I worked at SoundCloud. And in each of those jobs, I've caused my fair share of incidents. So I've written a fair share of postmortems as well. And now I've sort of gone full circle and I build a product for writing postmortems. So I get to be on both sides of the story, which if you start thinking about it for too long, starts to get quite meta. Yeah, so it's great to see so many of you have signed up. We'll start with a little bit of housekeeping. We will record this, so it will be available on demand afterwards if you want to rewatch it or pass it on. Please keep asking questions in the chat throughout. There's a team of us here. We'll try and answer as many of them as possible at the end. We've also got a bunch of questions from people who've asked those ahead of time, and we'll go over those at the end as well. So yes, we've done the first part of the agenda, which is the intro, and we're going to go through a few things. So I'm going to start off by talking why postmortems are important, and talk about where they start to fall flat. So where do they kind of go wrong? What could we improve? I'll go over a few best practices as well. And then I'm going to pick out some real life examples. So a couple of postmortems of ours that I'm a fan of, and a couple of sort of public ones that I think are nice examples of where postmortems go right as well. And then, as I mentioned, we'll do kind of Q&A at the end from questions that you've sent in, and we'll take some questions from chat as well. So you've signed up for a webinar on postmortems, so maybe I'm preaching to the converted here, but if we want to talk about why postmortems fall flat, I think first we have to talk about why they're important. The most important point for me is that they let you learn. So they give you this kind of space to understand what actually happened in that incident. And I don't think you can really write a good postmortem without understanding what did happen. I know sometimes you read a postmortem that is a bit more of a statement of events or facts. And I think that's part of a good postmortem. But if you didn't kind of learn anything else out of it, it's not particularly valuable. So think about reading a postmortem for something like a big AWS outage. If it's mostly just a list of dates and times of the incident and a sort of statement of what happened, how do you end up feeling about that as a customer of AWS? I think you really want to walk away from reading a postmortem thinking yeah, I'm confident that thing won't happen again. I've got trust in these people. And each of the points on the rest of this slide is kind of a subheading under learning, but I think that's okay. I think it's important to reflect on contributing factors. So bad things happen, and it's worse if those bad things happen more than once. And a good postmortem will identify things that contributed to that incident. And the plural here is kind of intentional. So I think a lot of people focus on finding just a single root cause, but I think it's important to try and find a few. There's this model that I'm a big fan of called the Swiss cheese model of accident causation. And I like it because it says that human systems are like layers of Swiss cheese, essentially all lined up in a row, random holes in them. And the risk of a threat becoming reality is something passing through from one side to the other. So you want to think that, there are a few layers of defense or a few chances to stop that thing becoming reality. And so when you're thinking about a postmortem, you're not just trying to find the one thing that let this thing happen. There's usually just a few things working together in concert. I think it's also good to reflect on your response processes. So not just what broke, but how did we fix it? So in our post-mortem template that we use at Incident.io, we ask ourselves, what would have sped up the response? That is a question that's in our template. And it feels a bit nicer to frame it that way than, what slowed us down, what made this worse. But this is where we cover things like, we should have looped in somebody from our customer success team a bit earlier, or there was one recently where we lacked a good template for posting to our status page. So we had to get one, like an update written and approved by people. And we always ask ourselves, how could we speed that up next time? It gets us to that resolution more quickly. I also think postmortems are great for building knowledge. So the document that you end up with itself is a searchable record, and that becomes really valuable if the same thing does happen again. But it's also useful if you want to refer back to earlier postmortems along a different theme as well. I think a great example of this is there's a guy called Dan Liu who has a postmortems repository on GitHub where people sort of add pull requests of great examples. I think that's really worth checking out, but broadcasting is a great way of building that knowledge as well. And along a similar lines, postmortems also can give you that visibility, particularly across teams. So when you publish a postmortem, it can help other teams to understand the risks. This doesn't have to be internal though. So I don't know, how many times have you gone and read a postmortem from somebody on the internet and taken a look at it and thought, actually, I can see that would happen to us, and you share the knowledge about a certain system or a certain piece of technology and think, well, there's some like reflection for us to do there as well. Visibility also becomes even more valuable in large organizations or complex systems. And I think having a good way of sharing those is really important. And finally, reputation. So every time you have an incident, there might be revenue loss. You can burn reputation with customers really quickly, and you can do this in sort of relatively company-ending ways, depending on who you are. Like, have you ever seen a supplier have an incident and think, that's another nail in the coffin for those folks? It's not all kind of negative though. So I've had exactly the opposite. I've read postmortems and thought, wow, these people really have got their stuff together and they're taking this seriously. So I think postmortems in that way can be quite a make or break moment, particularly when they're shared publicly. So now the kind of reason you're here, the time to talk about why we think postmortems fall flat. And I think there's two sides to this, writing and reading. And I think there's probably like much more to talk about in the writing than the reading, but I do want to talk about both. So let's talk about writing first. I think there are a huge number of reasons to write a postmortem, but I think there's also like a competing set of reasons in opposition to not write them. So rather than being alone in this room in London with a great support team behind me, I'd love to sort of get a poll going and ask you what your sort of main reasons end up being for not writing a postmortem. So I think there's a few of them. So if you click on the poll tab on the right, you should see a few options. These were just a few I came up with. So, often people might feel like they're not worth it. They don't have enough time to do it. They're not actually required to do it. I think writing well is also really hard. And there's also a something else option. So take a look and see what you think. Most people are going for the not enough time version. And I feel you. That's hard. Nice. It's a good spread. I think that feeling of like not enough time is like a really tricky one as well. Cool. I will carry on. I don't know if people are still voting. I'm going to press close. Sorry if you're still voting. Cool. So let's see how that sort of tallies up with what I thought people might say in my slide. I think one of the reasons that they can fall flat is that writing starts to feel like a kind of chore to people. So I think if you've just spent hours fixing something really stressful, and now the first thing you need to go and do is write about it, that's probably the kind of the last thing that you would like to do there and then. You need a bit of a break. I also think that a blank page can be quite intimidating for a lot of people. So where do you even begin to write about this thing? Like, what is expected of me? What do I need to talk about? I think this is where sort of templates can really help. But I think it's where good templates can really help. If you've got a template that has sort of 10 empty sections staring you down, I think that's probably even worse than an empty page, because now it seems like this sort of huge daunting task stretching out in front of you. I also think that a lot of time postmortems can be written for the wrong reasons. So I think we've kind of spoken about some of the reasons that you would write a postmortem. I think often it can feel like the person writing the postmortem is box ticking, or it's being done purely for compliance reasons or things like that. And I know that we had a few questions from people about the kind of theme of getting people to take postmortems seriously. So I would definitely want to give that a decent chunk of time later. But if the only reason that you're writing a postmortem is because your process told you to, then it will probably read that way as well. It's not going to be a particularly kind of engaging document for people. I also think that writing well is really, really hard. I think most engineers probably didn't get into engineering because they love writing. I mean, probably love writing code, but maybe you don't enjoy writing big, long documents. And postmortems are kind of asking you to do something that I think is genuinely difficult, which is you have to take this complex technical issue or event and convey that to a mixed audience really clearly, whilst also being honest about what went wrong there. And I think that's a real skill, but I think it's also one that you can learn. And then finally, I've seen a lot of cases where only one person is writing the postmortem. And I think there's two ways that you can sort of interpret this. The best person to write the postmortem document is really the person who led the incident. But I've seen cases where either they're written by one central person within an organization whose job is to be the postmortem writing person. If you are that person, I see you, I appreciate you. But I've also seen cases where, it maybe is just the incident lead who is writing the postmortem. And I think that it's rare that there is only ever sort of one person tackling an incident. And I think getting like multiple people involved in the writing process can actually bring like several perspectives, and like you end up with a better document as a result. You share a bit of the workload as well. It kind of makes lighter work of it. So let's also talk a little bit about reading. You could write the best postmortem document in the world, but if nobody ever reads it, then what's the use? So why spend 2 hours writing this incredible postmortem, and if 3 people skim read it, then kind of what was the use there? They could also be kind of boring. So, reading postmortems that say at 14:32, the alert fired, at 14:35, the on-call acknowledged. That is a log rather than a story. And I think as humans reading things, we're more wired for stories than we are for logs. I think that would end up with my brain at least switching off fairly quickly. And postmortems can honestly be too long. I think when you are putting a postmortem together, it's incredibly tempting to include everything that happened. So every message that was in the channel, every decision that was made, or every time that you attempted to roll back. And when you're writing a postmortem, I think as a writer, you're not just a writer, but you're also having to be an editor as well. So keep the reader in mind, get a sense check. Is this thing far too long? Is there too much information in it? And kind of related to that, I think it's not often that you come across a postmortem document where you're like, wow, this is lovely, this is beautiful. It's care and attention has gone into this. I don't think anybody is a big fan of a wall of text, but if you don't have sort of some of the basics like headings, formatting, images, then I think the people that come to view that document are just going to bounce off it immediately and think, oh, I don't have time to get stuck into that right now. And I think when you've got a document that is kind of nicely formatted, the first thing you think is somebody cared about this document, somebody's put time and effort into it, and I should sort of go to the trouble to reading it. I think it's a bit more of a subconscious thing that people are thinking. And there's sort of the visual density, but then there's the density of the subject matter as well. So I think, you've seen post-mortems where every single sentence assumes that you've read the source code of Kubernetes cover to cover and is covering all of these concepts that you are completely unfamiliar with. As a writer, you should try and remember that level of context that the different groups of readers are going to have. And I think that's particularly difficult when there are some deeper technical parts that you need to cover, and you need to sort of pitch to multiple groups or like multiple levels of knowledge at once. And that can be really tricky. And then finally, along the same lines, you kind of need to pick that right level of abstraction. If you've got those different audiences with different needs, then you need to make sure that you're kind of pitching to them correctly. So the things that the rest of your team would care about will be different to the things that perhaps VPs and C-suite would care about, would be different to things that engineers at other teams at the company would care about. And I think most post-mortems probably only really do a solid job of writing for one of those audiences. So it's good to keep in mind what those audiences are as well. So we've spoken about some of the problems. So I'd like to cover what I think are some of the best practices here. The first one is write it quickly. I have so many times, the last thing that I've wanted to do after getting out of an incident is go and write the post-mortem, but then almost immediately regret that, because the longer you wait, the more that you forget, that the context evaporates and the details fade. And I think the best post-mortems are written whilst that incident is still kind of fresh in your mind and probably still stings a bit. So it's tricky, but it's worth it. And telling a story as well, I think, is really important. So try to make it chronological and have a bit of a narrative arc to it. So walk people through what was happening, what went wrong, how did you find out, and what you did about it. It kind of makes sense if the document sort of follows the order of events of the incident itself. This also kind of helps because people tend to remember stories rather than bullet points. So I think if there is a narrative to it, whatever learnings that you're covering there will stick in people's minds a bit more easily. Being specific is also incredibly important. So if you are saying in your document, the database was slow, that is not particularly useful. But if you say, for example, the replication lag hit 45 seconds because the primary ran out of connections, that's much more helpful to people. And I think being specific is what makes a post-mortem actually be actionable. Being honest rather than diplomatic. I didn't quite know how to phrase this one, but when I worked at Monzo, they had this really nice kind of company value of being tough on problems, not on people. So if, for example, your deploy process was broken, it's okay in the document to say the deploy process was broken. I think you've seen a lot of times where that starts to get softened into things like, oh, there may be opportunities to improve our deployment workflow, or the kind of the actions can get softened a little. I think it's okay to be fairly direct and honest, and do that in a sort of way that is diplomatic as well. Along those lines, making sure that the actions are concrete and owned. So in the same way that you wouldn't kind of soften those things, you might say having improved monitoring in a document feels to me more like a wish than an action. Like, I think we all wish that our monitoring was improved. But if your action is something like, Sam, can you add an alert for replication lag exceeding 30 seconds? That is a far more actionable thing. So it's got a name, it's got a verb and a measurable outcome. It's very easy to say if that thing is done or not. I think it's also really important to include what went well. So with postmortems, I think it can be very easy to focus on the problem and the sort of the negatives and what could have gone better. I find it's really valuable to focus on what went really well during the response as well. So fast detection, good communication. And I think positive reinforcement there makes people want to do incident response rather than dread it. I'm just going to have a quick drink before I start coughing all over this. There we go. And then finally, like, know your audience. I think we've said a few different varieties of this already, but ask yourself, like, would this document make sense to somebody that wasn't there? I think, I mean, I have this with all sorts of things, with post-mortem documents, with pull requests, that as soon as you send that thing to be reviewed by somebody else, they almost immediately spot something that could be improved. So getting a sense check on this thing can be super useful as well. Think about, like, your document is a kind of snapshot of a moment in time, and ask yourself, would this make sense to somebody who comes along in 2 months' time or 2 years' time? Try not to assume like loads of context, but at the same time, if you sort of write everything from first principles and explain everything from scratch, you're going to end up with 30 pages. So it's about finding that balance as well. Okay, quick poll time between the two. I'd love to know whether you spend more of your time reading postmortems or writing postmortems. And I'm going to have a quick look in chat to see what people are saying as well. It's a little more 50-50 than I expected. Julian, I also really like what you say about how calling our own things broken is very easy, but calling other people's stuff broken is like hard as well. I think we'll touch on some of that a bit later. Oh, this is way more 50-50 than I thought. It's nice to know that there's a good gang of readers. Okay, let's move ourselves on. Nice. So, being a good reader, I think, I mean, this sounds like a very obvious point, but actually reading the document, I think again, it sounds obvious, but I think a lot of people don't. I think if you were to go and, I don't know, pick out the last postmortem that you read and go and message the person who wrote it to say, like, hey, I read your postmortem and I appreciated it, or even just commenting on it, I think that is already doing like more than almost everyone. I think if you want to incentivize people to write good postmortems, giving that bit of that feedback can be super useful as well. And I think that person would appreciate it. Again, like engaging with the document, asking questions. So asking, what made you try thing X before you tried thing Y? Or was there a reason that the alert didn't fire sooner? I know a lot of people do this in the form of debrief meetings. This is how we do it at Instant IO, that we share around the document kind of 70% finished, and then have a debrief meeting to get together where we run through the document, review it, ask any questions, and then do the sort of the final fit of things. Good questions really, really help to make the document better, and they also show the writer that what they've written like matters, that people are engaging with it. Talked a bit about actions before, but challenge weak actions. If you see a follow-up or something that says improve monitoring and it has no owner and no specifics, try and push back on those things. And it sounds a bit extreme, but I think that these sort of weak actions are kind of where learning goes to die almost. It's where it can be very easy to go to all the effort of writing this postmortem, but then have weak actions coming out of it, and then you sort of lose a lot of the value of it, I think. Highlighting blind spots can be super important as well. So I think if you are an outsider, say you were somebody who wasn't involved in the incident, but you have some kind of reason to read the postmortem, you're going to be really great at spotting what's missing from the document. I think when you're a writer, you can tend to get tunnel vision about those things and what's there. And having somebody else around to notice those gaps, whether it's just an initial review or after the postmortem has been shared, I think it's really important to call those out with people. And then finally, don't nitpick. I think when you are reading a document, it can be really tempting to try and wordsmith the kind of the things that are said there. I think the goal of the postmortem document overall is to learn from it rather than like hitting the New York Times bestseller list. Good writing is really important, and I think good reviewing also can involve a level of like critiquing the writing. But I think any level of over editing can start to really discourage people from writing next time. I think there's also various different ways that you can kind of deliver that feedback as well. So yeah, the next few slides, we're just going to cover a few examples of postmortems that I like, and I've sort of taken a couple of our own to use as examples. This one I really like because it tells a story. So many moons ago, back when Instant.io was starting out, we were hosted on Heroku, and this was sort of like an issue we were having with some repeated crashes on Heroku. And one of the things I like about this is it kind of reads like a story rather than a report. Like it's chronological, and it's got this kind of timeline you can see at the bottom. But yeah, the kind of, I think the thing that we were thinking at the moment is, or at the time, sorry, was Instant.io is a place that you come to when things are not necessarily going particularly well. If you're having an incident, so you're not having a great time, it's really important for us to be a kind of stable platform. And I like that this document is kind of conveys that we take this seriously, and that transparency is something that's important to us. And I think that can help rebuild a bit of trust with people. I think it's pretty honest as well. So Pete, our CTO, has this kind of thing that he said to me once when we had an incident here that involved a third party that was different. Pete's got two really cute kids, and he said to me once when I was writing a post-mortem, he was like, look, if I ask you to look after my kids and you agree to do that, but then you go and leave my kids with something else, like someone else, and something happens, like you're still accountable, like you're the one I trusted. So I think that the honesty I like here is that you can't really like outsource that accountability for things. So, you know, we're not sort of shifting the blame over to Heroku. We're saying like, no, this is an issue on our turf, and we're like committed to fixing it. This one in particular, I think, has got like a decent level of technical depth as well. So we've got a bunch of code snippets in there. I think if any of you are like Go programmers and have dealt with panics and Go routines, you probably go and read this and empathize a bit. And I think that having that transparency like builds that trust amongst people as well. The second example is another one of ours, but is not actually one that we published. So it's an internal one that's using the new post-mortem editor that we have, that we're kind of in the process of releasing now. I will talk a bit about that later. One thing I like about this one is it really didn't take that long to write. So I think we'll kind of scroll through a few screenshots, but it's really just 3 sections with 2 paragraphs each. I think the person that wrote this, maybe it took them 15 or 20 minutes. It's got like a few bullet points at the end. And this wasn't a particularly bad incident for us. This was like a minor incident, but we could still learn things from it. And I really like writing postmortems for smaller incidents as a way of sort of forming a habit with people. It's the same for having the debrief meetings that go along with them. And I like this one because it's nicely formatted. It feels nice to read. You've got this kind of timeline front and center. It makes me think like, hey, yeah, the person that wrote this like cared about it and it's worth reading. And kind of thinking about the incident itself, I think that the resolution of the incident was kind of human rather than technical in the first instance. So I think we spoke to the customer over Slack and kind of stop the bleeding first and let them know that we were on it. It's kind of nice and concise, that it's low on jargon. And yeah, I think the kind of lowering that bar to writing like feels like a very valuable thing to me. Especially when for such a minor thing, we actually, as part of this, identified like a systemic gap related to how we do rate limiting in some places. So the conclusion here wasn't just like, oh, a customer did something funny and sent us a load of webhooks. It was like, we have a system that lacked protection. And I think that's particularly interesting when sometimes small incidents can be precursors to like bigger, worse versions of the same incident as well. And last of all, this is something kind of I don't know if we do this differently to people, but I said before that the post-mortem document is probably about 70% finished before we go to the debrief meeting and discuss it. We always include these kind of talking points at the bottom, which is roughly what we'd like to cover in the debrief meeting. And yeah, the kind of the points that we included here are something I liked with this one is that we talked about the different ways that this incident could have gone, like what were the kind of key points where it could have gone slightly differently. So I think it only affected a single customer and it happened during business hours, and we were kind of talking about like, how would this have felt if it was outside business hours? So I think as the writer, being able to steer some of the discussion and knowing what you'd like to get out of that debrief meeting is really valuable as well. But most of all, I think the thing I like the most about this postmortem is that it exists, and that somebody went to the trouble of writing it. So we like broadcast these out to a instant learnings Slack channel that we've got with a sort of 1 paragraph summary. And I know we had a few questions about sharing and broadcasting learning. So we'll talk about some of those later as well. Finally, I wanted to just call out a few like non-incident IO examples that I think are really interesting. So I imagine a lot of people remember the 2024 CrowdStrike incident. They published a huge amount about this, and unsurprisingly, given the sort of magnitude of it. But I think it's a nice like Swiss cheese example where there were a few things that went wrong. So I think they pushed out bad content. They had this validator that should have caught the thing before it went live. They had deployments that should have been staged, and there were like multiple layers that failed. And I think they do a good job of sort of digging deep on each one of those. There was also a 2019 Cloudflare like classic where it was a regular expression. Like I'm surprised we've not covered anything DNS related here. I think they had like a badly written firewall rule, or regex in a firewall rule that took down their entire network for 25 minutes or so. And I like this one because it explains the technical like cause clearly enough that even I, as somebody who knows next to nothing about sort of deep networking and Cloudflare itself, that I can follow along with it as well. So I think it's a nice example of pitching those at the right level of detail. And as my sort of last example, not a post-mortem in the true sense, but if you've ever read the 2002 email classic, The Case of the 500-Mile Email, you should read it. It's about a situation where somebody couldn't send an email more than 500 miles away. I think it's just really good storytelling and good writing about, I won't spoil the surprise if you've not seen it, but I think it's a story that sticks in your head to the extent that now I'm thinking about this with lots of networking things. So it's that power of a good story. So I've spoken a lot about the human side of postmortems, the culture, the behaviors, the process, and that stuff genuinely matters and is the foundation of good postmortems and a good postmortem writing culture. But I think there's a lot of things that tooling and software can do to make this easier. And you've got great people deserve great tooling, and it's an Instant IO webinar, so I can't leave without a bit of a plug, because I'm also I think the kind of postmortems work that we've been doing over the past few months is genuinely some of the most fun projects that I've been on in terms of what the product is and how we've been building it. So yeah, we're building what I think is the best tool for writing postmortems. We're launching a revamped version next month. We think it's genuinely best in class tooling to help your organization actually write and run postmortems well. I'll give you a quick taste of what's coming. So we've got this sort of brand new rich editor, think sort of Notion, think Google Docs, but it's purpose built for postmortems, and it's got all of your incident data woven right in. It kind of reduces this need to switch between Grafana and all these other Notion docs and 3 other postmortems, and what was the custom field on that incident. It's all kind of together in that one place. We also have AI drafting and review. Like AI and postmortems is a huge topic and one that I find really interesting. And we've got a like section of the questions afterwards to talk about this. But we generate a kind of first draft from your template and your actual incident context. So it's got Slack messages, pull requests, all of those things. And we've got an agent and a sort of AI tooling that can review it for accuracy, completeness, gaps. And we found that when we use this, the question shifts from like, oh, how do I write this document to like, how do I make the document better? You kind of hit the ground running. Thirdly, we've got this sort of real-time collaboration. So inline comments, real-time co-editing, threaded conversations, everything you'd expect from an editor like this. And finally, we've also got Scribe. So if you are not familiar, we've got Scribe that will transcribe your instant calls. We are very shortly about to bring that to your debrief calls and your post-mortem meetings. So Scribe can capture the transcripts. It can bring those notes straight into the post-mortem so that the conversation doesn't get lost. We're going to have a lot more to share about this next month. So keep an eye out. I'm sure you will hear much more about it. So yeah, I hope that gives you a bit of an idea about what we think makes a good postmortem. And I think, like, as with most things that we do at work, it is this combination of people and tooling. And yeah, I don't think postmortems fail because you've got bad templates or missing tools. And I think Instant.io is a great tool for this because we bake a lot of this thinking in. But then I'm biased as well. But I think postmortems often fail because we forget that they are written by people for people. And I think the best postmortem culture isn't really about having a rigorous process or like a perfect document. I think it's about trying to make writing that document easy and rewarding and making it easy to be honest about the things that went wrong. And I think if we try to lower the bar for writing them and kind of raise the bar for reading them as well, then that's the thing that gets you to a better place. Like find a tool that lets you focus on the important parts and then make the people writing them feel like that their effort really matters. Yeah, I think that is what is most important. I would love to hear in chat what you all think as well. I'm keeping up with chat and various other things, so I'm sorry I've not been able to reply to you all directly, but I promise to go and have a look through it afterwards. Yes, so the Q&A, I think when you registered, you asked if there is a question you'd like to see answered live, and yeah, we received loads of these, so thank you for sending them in. We tried to kind of group them together and pick the ones that seemed to be resonating with people the most. So I'll go through them now. Apologies if I don't get to yours. After these, we'll kind of go and answer some questions in the Q&A tab in the chat. So please keep posting things in there. Yeah, I think one of the biggest themes was about blamelessness and organizational change. So people asking sort of, how do you ensure postmortems are truly blameless? What are some good ways to push for change? What is it like getting kind of technical issues addressed versus deeper systemic issues? Because I think those systemic issues are often harder to cover. And what are some tactics for getting non-technical follow-ups addressed? Let's start with the kind of the blameless side of things. I think blamelessness is kind of tricky because I think it can start to become a problem if you can't name anybody or talk about what specific people did in that incident. And I think that the goal here isn't really to pretend that humans weren't involved in this incident and to kind of depersonalize it, because I think incidents are very human things. I think it's about making it safe to be honest about what happened. So for us, we name people in our postmortems, like Sam deployed the change, Sam restarted the worker processes. And that's not blame, that's context. I think blame is when you say Sam should have known better than to do X, Y, Z. And context is Sam deployed the change and there was no guardrail to catch the bad deploy before it went out. So I think you should be able to sort of like give context around people and point at the problems with systems without sort of like blaming people, if that makes sense. Julian, I also like that blame aware phrase. I've not come across that before, but I am going to steal it. Yeah, so the next one, like, what are some good ways to push for positive change when dealing with someone who might not be invested? I think if someone is not invested in your kind of post-mortem process, then like a 15 question template probably isn't the thing that's going to convert them. So I think start small, like show this person that writing a post-mortem doesn't need to be like a big deal. But they have to kind of see the value of that for themselves. So I think it's quite hard when you try to argue this as a point of a like, you must write the post-mortem and like argue that it should be written. I think if you can point to a time that a post-mortem like prevented a repeat incident or that it helped another team avoid like a problem, then I think that is more valuable than any kind of like argument about process. And if people sort of like see the payoff but still aren't invested, then that's like a bigger, trickier problem. And I'm not sure I have a fantastic answer there, but I hope that like when people see, and more importantly, when people like experience the value of post-mortem, then they start to kind of internalize that. Yeah, let's talk about the like deeper systemic issues as well. I think often when you've got those sort of technical actions out of a post-mortem, they get done because they're concrete and they're kind of owned by the people who write the post-mortem often. But non-technical things like changes to process or team communication or like hiring strategies, documentation, that stuff tends to drift because it's nobody's specific job a lot of the time. So I think there's a few tactics here. I think if you treat non-technical actions with the kind of same rigor that you apply to technical ones, that can help. So I think if you have an action that's like improve communication between teams, that's just as bad as the like improve monitoring point that we talked about before. If it was like, oh, Sam, can you schedule a monthly sync between the platform and the payments teams and start that next sprint? That's much more likely to happen. So like, I think particularly if you were to tie them to the impact. So like, we lost 4 hours on this incident because the run book was out of date. That makes it a lot harder to like deprioritize as well. Colette, you're very right. Like Etsy's blameless post-mortem guide is really good as well. I should have like linked that one in the slides too. So thanks for calling that out. The next group was kind of about like follow-ups, accountability, driving action. So we talked a bit about this, but like, how do you set clear actionable tasks based on like learnings and takeaways? How can we ensure that people are working on their follow-ups like outside of incidents? Once a post-mortem is finished, how can you keep up momentum on follow-ups? What is the best approach to make people accountable for actions coming out of post-mortem sessions? With a kind of clear and actionable tasks, I think that the way I try to think about this is like, could somebody pick up this task without needing a follow-up conversation with me? So yeah, again, like improve monitoring. Someone's going to need to come and ask me like, what did you mean when you said improve monitoring? Yeah, if you've got that owner, if you've got this specific deliverable, I kind of think about this. I mean, sometimes it is literally this, but it's like filing a ticket, essentially, like try and include the context that person needs. In terms of like making sure that people are like actioning their follow-ups, I think like visibility is the biggest lever that you have here. So if your follow-ups live in like a Google Doc that nobody looks at after the debrief, they will kind of just go and rot away in that document for a while. I think they need to be tracked somewhere visible, like whatever ticketing system you use, a dashboard, like weekly review meetings, that then makes them much harder to ignore. Like plug again, but the way that we do this is that we track these in Instant IO with policies. So we say, oh, show me every follow-up for a major incident must have been actioned like 3 months after the incident is completed. And yeah, like letting those live where the rest of your work happens means that it's much harder to ignore them. And then, I don't know, if you're in a position as a sort of engineering manager or a tech lead or somebody like that, if you make sure that you kind of make follow-ups part of somebody's actual work rather than this extra work that they have to do on top. So if you've got your follow-ups sitting outside somebody's like sprint or backlog, they're always just going to lose out to the things that are being prioritized in the way that you prioritize the rest of your work. So we make all of our follow-ups land in exactly the same system where all of the rest of our work happens. They end up in linear, and we like triage them as well. Matt, I think your point about like inviting product managers into debriefs as well is super like legit. I think everybody at a company should care about something going wrong, and I think like getting those people bought in as well is like really, really useful. And then, yeah, the question from Vivek here. So once the post-mortem is finished, how can you keep momentum and evaluate whether you're getting meaningful outcomes? This is maybe the hardest question that we got, I think, is like, it kind of boils down to how do you know that writing the post-mortem was kind of worth it in the long run? But if you pare that back a bit and think about the kind of actions and follow-ups, there's some relatively like blunt tools that you can use. So like looking at follow-up completion rate as a metric. And I don't think you should make that a metric to gamify it and to try and make the number go up necessarily, but more to make the pattern visible. So if you have that metric and you see that you're completing 30% of your post-mortem actions, I think that tells you something about your process. So does it mean that perhaps that you're generating too many actions, or they're too vague, or they don't end up in like the right people's backlogs? I think that to me is like one metric that you can sort of use. But I think that the accountability also kind of comes down to the people in the end, right? It's like if you have an action assigned to you, it's kind of your responsibility to action that. But also, if you're, like I said, an engineering manager or a tech lead, it's kind of not putting pressure on people, but helping them to understand like why it is important for that action to be done. If the ticket that you pick up for the action is literally just please set up this alert so that it fires when replication lag gets to 30 seconds, but doesn't really convey why that's important. Like, did the person picking up the ticket see that incident and like see how bad it was and the impact it had on the business? Like, I think if you're a bit more aligned on that, then it becomes kind of easier to like sell the actions to people almost. Right. I can see that we've got 10 minutes left, so I'm going to try and power through some of these. So we've got like live Q&A time. Knowledge sharing, learning at scale. How do you make sure that learning from post-mortem spreads to different teams? How do you ensure that learnings are really distilled into teams efficiently? I think post-mortems, they need to be readable. They need to be findable. If they're buried in a folder that nobody knows about, they won't spread to people. I think push the post-mortems out to people once they're written. I think if you just have like a summary in a Slack channel or an email group somewhere, like with a one paragraph summary, that's perfect. We have this instant learning Slack channel where we push out like those to the company as well. And yeah, like write for the absent reader. So I think Stephen's question here about what about people who aren't present in that particular incident? Open with like an executive summary, like 3 to 5 sentences that anybody should be able to understand. most people aren't going to read the whole postmortem, and that's fine. But if they can at least get like the TLDR from it, I think that's really useful. You can categorize postmortems by theme and like build up a library over time. And yeah, you can't really like force people to learn from your postmortems, but you can just try and make it as easy as possible. Oh, AI. I think we've got quite far without saying much about AI in the past hour, which is quite refreshing. But I think AI is genuinely useful here, but for a very specific thing. And I think that is getting you past the blank page. So I actually think that like most of the value in a postmortem is the process of writing it, because the process of writing a postmortem forces you, the writer, to understand exactly what happened. You pull together the timeline, you like look through Slack, work out what the sequence of events was. And I think if AI takes that writing process away from you, it also kind of steals the learning from you, or the understanding. You can just sort of like click a button, generate a postmortem, and then be done. Whereas I think the way that we see it with what we're doing with postmortems is that it can sort of get you past that like blank page stage and give you a first draft, and then give you tools to sort of help review what you've written to check it for completeness or accuracy, things like that. And so, yeah, AI is, and LLMs specifically, are like very good at summarizing things. So it can read your incident channel, pull out the key moments, build you a draft. But yeah, AI shouldn't. I don't think AI should write your analysis. Like I think the what happened part of the postmortem can be automated, but the answering the kind of the why it happened and what are we going to do about it, I think needs to come from the humans that were there. And that's where the learning lives. And if you automate that away, you've kind of automated away the most important part. So I think the right model for this is that AI does the sort of like the grunt work for you, and humans do the kind of actual thinking. And yeah, like related to this, I think like someone was asking, like, see how a good postmortem can be built from the incident channel comms. I think your incident channel is like already a really good source of like information. So it's that real-time log of decisions, discoveries, where you pivoted. Often, I don't know, particularly in Slack as well, it's also full of like noise. You might get status updates, lots of emoji reactions, like, oh, let me check this, let me check that. And I think the timeline is really like one of the most important parts of the postmortem. Like we, with our timeline editor that we have, trying to help you extract that signal from the noise. But I think you want to be focused on pulling out like the key decisions, the moments where your understanding of the incident shifted, or the points where different people got involved. Those are, I think, when you're like looking at the incident channel and trying to build up a good postmortem document, I think those are the things that you should be focused on. And yeah, like postmortems add the reasoning, but it's the kind of the context you want. The channel tells you what people did, but doesn't really tell you what they were thinking at the time. And I think that can only really come from the people involved in the incident as well. Cool. All right, I've erased through those, and there's a lot going on in the chat. So I'd love to take a few comments from there. I can see there's a bunch of Q&A coming. I'm going to switch to the right tab. Let's have a look. Let's have a browse through. Well, like this one from Dan. I'm gonna, yeah. So Dan was asking, like, what's your process when creating an internal versus external postmortem? Do you do both for all incidents or just high severity incidents? We don't really have like a solid rule here, but we will try and like do a public write-up whenever we can. So for any kind of like major incident that impacted our customers, we will try and publish something publicly. And usually that public postmortem will just kind of be I wouldn't say anonymized, but like a kind of a version of the internal postmortem is written for a different audience. So people who perhaps have less like context, that we kind of make sure we pitch it at the right audience. But the process is really that we write the internal postmortem first, and then we write the external customer-facing postmortem, and kind of go through the same process, but with like a little bit more like reviewing diligence. It's we hold a slightly higher bar for like the quality of the writing, the formatting, make sure that it reads nicely, all of those things. Yeah, we don't do both for all incidents, but like, I don't know, I think we've done whole other conference talks on how we declare incidents for basically everything here. So we just do this for the sort of like higher impact customer facing incidents as well. So thanks for that question, Dan. What else have we got here? Let's have a look. Got one here from somebody that says, how do you keep postmortem requirements consistent across teams when some do a better job of writing them than others? Yeah, I guess it kind of depends here what you mean by postmortem requirements. I think some people think of that as a kind of very specific set of formatting or questions that you need to answer. I guess there's part of this that is about consistency. So if you want that consistent format across teams, I think that templates are a really good answer to this. But when I don't know if you mean sort of consistency of format or like consistently high quality. I think for high quality, it's about kind of elevating and sharing those postmortems that you think are really high quality, and showing that the kind of there is that people around the business value these postmortems when they're written well. So I think if there's a team that are sort of consistently writing postmortems that are not as good as those in other teams, it's kind of interesting to dig a bit into why. Is it that they're kind of short on time? Is it that they don't know what good looks like? I think there can be all sorts of reasons for them kind of being like inconsistent. But I think sharing all postmortems and like sharing examples of things can be really useful as well. Cool. Let's see what else we've got here. Oh, I like this one from Joel. Yeah, Joel says, we've had a few postmortems recently written by AI. Not that it's a problem if done properly, but with too many bullet points and headings, details and garbage, how can we balance between ease and usefulness, and how can it be enforced? I think this is quite a sort of common problem with LLMs in general. So you sort of give it a little bit of context and it comes out with sort of 9 paragraphs of saying similar things like over and over again. I think if you're using AI tools to write postmortems in this way, it's kind of, there is that trick of like crafting the prompt correctly so that you get something like really useful out of it and not like something incredibly verbose. So when we've been looking at using AI to write first drafts of postmortems within Instant.io as part of the product, we put quite a lot of like effort and energy into making sure that it doesn't have this problem. If you're sort of thinking about this from the engineering side, for us, that looks like having like evals and back tests so that we can, you know, if we find examples where it did do this and it did sort of produce 9 bullet points and loads of nonsense, that we explicitly test against that, iterate on the prompts, and like make sure that we're putting in those kinds of safeguards. So I think, I don't know, in a world where the tool is kind of doing the AI drafting for you, and the tool itself can kind of enforce like restrictions around how long it is, then I think that can be helpful. But if it's people just writing their own prompts and doing it in like ChatGPT and Claude, I guess it's like much harder to enforce that. Nice. I think we've got 33 seconds remaining. So I don't know. I'm just going to pick the last question I see. Yeah, so this one, regarding the Swiss cheese model of incident causation, any suggestions on how to implement this in dealing with pushback from some teams that may just want to leave the root cause as one more general option? I think that the question here is like, who or what is forcing you to just identify a single root cause? And do they actually think that there really should only be one root cause? I think you can like, if you come up with 3 things that feel like they contributed to like the root cause of the incident, then you're forced to only have one. Are you going to like discount those other 2? So I'll keep this answer really short for time. But yeah, also thanks to the people that are saying hi and leaving in chat. I know we're about to leave. So I'll leave you very briefly with, if I can find my slides, a thank you. So yeah, if you want to know more about Incident.io, please scan this QR code. We can get you a demo of the whole platform, including the post-mortem stuff that we've been working on. For more information on our AI features like Scribe, I think there's a link in chat under the resources tab. I will have a look through the chat log afterwards so I can see what you're all saying. But if you've got any questions or you want to pick my brains, I'm Sam at Instant.io. Otherwise, thank you for coming. It was nice to see you all engaging in chat. Hope you enjoyed it and hope you have a nice rest of the day.